slightly, but we are all good to go here. So thank you for your attendance, and thank you everybody for your punctuality as always. Good. Seems like everyone is well. That's fantastic. This is the next in our employability series, 21st Century Skill. We are sharing with you guys in the webinar series. A very warm welcome to everybody. We're going to be speaking a little bit about a very fun topic today called anger management. I'm only being half facetious, I'm half joking about that. I actually think it is quite an interesting topic. It is possible to have some fun with it as much as it's a very serious topic. And I think that's been shown in the popular portrayal of management. And obviously movies made out of kind of tongue in cheek, right? It's quite a funny idea of managing our anger, and the extent that people go to and the techniques people use to manage their anger is something a lot of people have seen the funny side of, and I thought that's understandable. But of course, at the same time, it is one of those things that does cause challenges for a lot of people, and that's quite normal in its own way. In fact, that you might find it quite challenging at times to manage this powerful emotion called anger. That's normal. And in this webinar, we're going to speak a little bit about why that's normal, and hopefully share a few techniques that you can use to find ways of managing your anger. So without further ado, let's kick it off, and we'll get started. Again, I'll try to keep an eye on the chat as we go. I will try to handle questions there, but there will be time for Q&A. So feel free to put them, to chat as we go. I'm not going to be able to see all of the messages, but if anything relevant is coming up, I'm going to keep an eye on it. Okay. So always the best way to start. There will be as well, a moderator who will just be answering any of your administrative questions about the webinar certificates. And if you're having technical issues, there is an administrator who will be there to assist you. I'm not going to deal with those questions myself. I'll just deal with the ones that are surrounding the actual the webinar itself. Content there. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so a good place to start, of course, is asking the question, well, what is this thing that we're speaking about today called anger? It's something that, of course, we all are aware of. It's one of the more commonly presented emotions. It's emotion, especially in a place like South Africa, that we often feel more in our society. We feel more comfortable expressing something like anger than we do the more vulnerable feelings. People are more likely to kind of display anger than to have been exposed to anger, perhaps, than the other feelings that people tend to do a better job of hiding, because anger can often feel like strength and power. So what is it? Well, essentially, it's an emotion, and it's a feeling. As we've spoken about before, three aspects of human psychology: our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions, our behavior. Anger is an emotion, it's a feeling, and it varies in intensity. So it can just be mild irritation. Why is James a minute late today for this webinar? Said it was going to finish at 12. I'm here at 12. Why is he not here at 12? It's mild irritation. It's intense fury and rage. I can't believe that the person that I trusted so much has betrayed me in this way, and I just want to act out in a physical way. That's the other end of the video. So like any other emotion, you can see physiological markers to it, so changes. This is related to the stress response, fight or flight response, the arousal of our autonomic nervous system. When we get angry, our bodies get ready for action. So our heart rate increases, our blood pressure goes up, we focus in our attention. It feels like this is the most important thing in the world. We disengage the more rational parts of our brain. As a very we get really loaded with adrenaline, with these hormones, adrenal hormones like adrenaline or norepinephrine as well, and that really gets us going. It gets us ready to act, and this is a very helpful thing. Like most of our stress response has been historically through our evolution, it's been really helpful to be able to respond in really in ways that require physical actions, such as running away or fighting with the danger that we see in front of us. But as always, in a modern society, when we are triggered, when something makes us angry, we don't always have that approach. And most of the time, actually, we don't have that approach open to us. We can't just run away from the thing that makes us angry. We can't just annihilate it and destroy it. We have to find a way of regulating those feelings. And this is often where the work of anger management lies. Anger gets a very bad rap. We don't think favorably of. And well, the reasons for that are obvious. Most of the time when we see anger, it's not pleasant. Most of the time when we feel anger, it's uncomfortable. And we often see the negative consequences of behavioral reactions to anger. But it's important to remember it's a very usual, it's a very normal and healthy expression of being human. It's part of the full emotional range that we have. It's there to get us acting. It's there to get us, standing up for ourselves, fighting for the things that are important. It's our cheerleader, if you will, when things aren't right. Anger is saying, fix this. Something is not right, yeah, act on it. And that by itself is not necessarily it's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, it's just a thing. What we choose to do with that is where the difference comes in. Because it's so powerful, it's there as a mobilizing emotion. So it's there to get us acting. Because it's such a powerful and mobilizing emotion, it can feel like when we're angry, we tend to lose more rational thought than with some of our other emotions. So it can feel very overwhelming. And we can learn to then distance ourselves from our anger via our anger response. And so we find maladaptive ways of dealing with it. Our emotional regulation around anger then starts to become more avoidant. We start to associate it as something that is threatening, something that is overwhelming, something that is going to challenge our control and make us do things that we regret. And some of the time, we are right about that. Some of the time, we're absolutely right because there are costs that come with anger. There are costs that come with poorly regulated anger, and there are costs that come with the behavior around anger that's not well. Relationship costs. So if we are getting angry and flying off the handle all the time and not responding to our anger in a more adaptive way or constructive way, our relationships are going to suffer. People are going to probably fear us. They're not going to respect us as much. They're not going to trust us. They're probably going to want to avoid us more. It might lead to the deterioration and eventually the breakdown of key relationships in our lives. As well as that, it's financial costs. So, if we're experiencing road rage, we might be in danger of damaging our car. We might throw things, break things. And people sometimes smash their laptop, cell phone. There are financial costs that vary. Career. This is linked to the relationship aspect as well. But if we are unable to control our anger and unable to act in ways when angry that are still professional, well, then it's going to stall our career. It's going to get in the way of progress. It's going to mean we get a certain reputation as well that might be in conflict with career advancement. Internalized anger that we don't have an outlet for, anger that's either directed at ourselves or maybe directed at other people, but we don't have any way of expressing it. That is very detrimental to our mental health, and it's a big driver of things like depression as well. When we're kind of sitting with this resentment that we can't have any way of dealing with, we can then pay the mental health price. And our physical health, of course, being angry, being in that aroused stress response, the heightened blood pressure, the increased heart rate, shallower breathing, all of those responses, the renal response, that's going to have detrimental effects for our physical health as well, and increase the likelihood of immunocompromised responses to illnesses, to more chronic conditions as well. So, Ashley, noting your question on nature versus nurture, fantastic question, and I'm going to come back to that and address this as we go. That's a very relevant question. So we can think about 3 ways of expressing our anger. And I suppose to Ashley's question and to the point that's applied there, we often learn these responses through what we see. Which is to say, more often than not, you're going to see that the environmental factors that we go through tend to condition the way that we express our anger. So there's 3 main ways that you can do it. And you can think about it on a continuum. And sometimes a helpful way of thinking about these things, traits, rather internalized. That means something makes me angry and I bite my tongue. And people can be really good at this. You might not even know. I had a client the other day who I was working with in a couples counseling session, and this person was just sitting there, and just they were chewing gum, and their jaw was just starting to go, and you can just see, like a ferocious cow, that this jaw was just going, not saying anything, and their face was completely blank, but the jaw was really working. And I said, what's going on there? And their partner said, they're angry, that they're really angry right now. And that partner, obviously, they'd learned the cues after 30 years together or whatever it was. But for anyone else, you would have just seen this person chewing and not knowing actually what is going on. That's an example of internalized anger. So there can be a lot going on under the surface, but actually nothing being expressed. Obviously, the other side of that is externalizing. So when I'm feeling a certain way, and then it all comes out. So when I'm angry. You won't be left immediately surprised with something angry. It's going to come out. That type of response. That type of person as well. And what can often happen is that we tend to, because we have this tendency to avoid our feelings, to avoid our anger specifically. What we can do is we can kind of go through this internalizing, externalizing cycle, which we internalize, avoid the conflict. We don't say how we're really feeling, keep it safe, and then bam, it all comes out, externalizing. And often the things we're trying to avoid there, by internalizing, I'm saying things like, I don't want to hurt people, I don't want to ruin my relationships, I don't want to regret my choices, I don't want to be seen as an arrogant person. So we internalize 90% of the time, but that 1%, when we actually explode, does the opposite of those things. We end up breaking, damaging our relationships, hurting people. Somewhere in between those is the ability to express our anger, which is to say, I'm feeling this way, to acknowledge it mindfully ourselves, but also to be able to speak and operate whilst angry. That's a very specific skill, and we're going to get to some of the techniques we can use to get there. But that is a skill that people will often say, when I get angry, I prefer just to walk away, and then I come back, and when I'm not angry, and I'll deal with it. And then that's helpful. It's really helpful if you can do that. But what happens when you come back and you get angry again? Then you have to walk away again, and you come back and you get angry. So I mean, there is a limit to how that can be. And of course, being able to just pause and not necessarily act when you're angry is a helpful response. But we also have to be able to function whilst we're feeling that feeling. And some mindfulness is helpful there, some ability to regulate an emotion, but just to be able to say, it's also important that I express these sentiments and these thoughts that I'm having, and learning ways of doing that. And again, sometimes we can learn that that's not possible because we never see it being done in a healthy way. We never see someone who's angry acting to the person they are angry with in a respectful way. Often becomes all bets are off. Once you make me angry, once you stand on my toe, that gives me a right to stomp your foot back. That's the rule we often write for ourselves in a relationship. That's the rule we often see modeled, and we observe it, and so we learn there is no healthy way of actually operating, communicating whilst angry. But that's not necessarily true. So yes, a lot of our anger management styles we learn and we observe it in our formative years. It's what we've seen, what we've been exposed to. It's how we've learned that it's dealt with. And you can understand anger through this lens of emotional regulation. We're going to talk more specifically about emotional regulation itself and different strategies there in a future webinar. That'll be in the month of April, I believe. Late April, early May. Thinking about anger as an emotion and just understanding it the way that we regulate other emotions, just like we spoke about in the mindfulness webinar, just to be able to acknowledge it in an accepting way, non-judgmental way, and finding ways of expressing it in that way. And the inability to emotionally, to regulate that emotion, the inability to regulate that anger in a constructive way, that ends up with this tendency to either internalize or externalize, and the unhealthy consequences that happen for that, our relationships. So if you think about the biggest cause of anger management, it's a number of them, but if you were to ask me what my number one cause of the anger that I see in people, and the people who are looking for help dealing with their anger, professional help dealing with their anger, number one cause would be linked to self-esteem. So people who struggle with self-esteem are much more likely to struggle with anger problems. And this is one of the major keys to learning how to manage anger. Is we have to go back to what's actually being triggered. What is it inside of us that is causing this feeling to happen? And you can think about it as a kind of a logical step. So there'll be something in our environment that happens, whatever it is, a situational factor. It might just be that we get lied to, for example. And then there's a trigger. The trigger seems very similar to the external factor. It seems very similar to what's happening in the environment, but actually it's different. Trigger is the thing inside of us that's connecting with. So it'd be, I hate being lied to. Because you could see if I get lied to and I don't have a trigger around it, and this is unusual, but it's not impossible. Someone might think it's actually not really something that's really important to me. I understand people lie for self-interest. I don't take it personally. There's no trigger there, which means the next step, which is the emotion, anger, isn't going to happen. So there's the situational event, there's the trigger, and then there's the feeling. After the feeling, there's a choice, and then there's the behavior itself. So there's a gap then between this emotion that I'm feeling and how I choose to behave. And we'll get back to that second part of the study later. But to go to the trigger side, think of the things that make us angry. So why does being lied to make us angry? It makes me angry when I get lied to because this person thinks that I'm so stupid that I can't tell the difference between what's really happening or not. It makes me feel angry because they're making a fool out of me. They know the truth, and they know that I don't know the truth, and I look really stupid as a result of that. To see how those feelings are around self-judgment, stupidity. I'm not in them. There's something about me that's lacking. That's self-worth, that's self-esteem. You can think about other triggers. Being disrespected. That's a big trigger factor. If someone disrespects me, why does that make me angry? Well, because I feel terrible about myself when I get disrespected. I feel like I am inadequate. I feel like this person wouldn't treat me like this if I was actually worth more. Issues around self-esteem being triggered there. And just an important distinction here. It doesn't mean that every time you get angry, that is a self-worth issue. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't ever get angry because that's proof that you don't have a high sense of your self-worth. It's just to understand that times when we're getting really angry, those triggers are often very close to, or adjacent, or linked directly to issues around our self-worth. And to be able to be mindful of that and reflective of that is a really helpful way of getting some control over our ability to regulate that feeling. So self-esteem is a really, really big buffer. It's a really big buffer to anger and anger management. Being able to understand the link between our anger and our beliefs about ourselves, and perhaps our feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt, is a really helpful way of dealing with that. So if you develop a robust sense of self-worth and cultivate self-compassion, that's again something we're going to spend more time talking about in the future webinar. This is one of the best ways of intervening at the level of the trigger. So dealing with anger to the point where we're able to, if we feel anger, it's not this really intense 10 out of 10 feeling, or we might not even feel it at all in a situation because it stopped being personal, it stopped being about us specifically. And this allows us then to intervene at the level of the choice, so the behavioral level. And this is often where you hear anger management advice. So again, what I'm speaking about is that chain of events. So there's the external event, there's the trigger, there's the emotion, there's the choice, and then there's the behavior. Often people intervene at the level of the choice. They say, well, you should just choose to do something else. Count to 10 when you're angry. Drink a glass of water, walk away, go for a run, go punch a punching bag, bite your tongue, don't say anything. That's the choice to behave in another way. And that's all helpful. But if you're feeling a really intense feeling of anger, it's very hard to make that choice when you're being that flooded and that overwhelmed. So being able to intervene at the level of the trigger means that anger you might just be feeling angry, but you might then be able to, it's a manageable enough feeling that you can choose to just say, right now, this is not worth my time. This person that just slammed on brakes in front of me or cut in front of me in traffic, I don't know who they are. This is not worth my life. My life is, then that anger is not as much, and we can actually just choose to ignore it or to deal with it in a different way. It's not to take ignoring it the other way. And then there are other tools that we can use to filter that. The ability to communicate well. So much of the time we're angry because we just can't get out what it is that we're actually feeling. either because we lack the capacity, the technical skills to communicate, or we have put barriers in our own way. We've created rules for ourselves that say you're not allowed to say this, that would be disrespectful. You're not allowed to speak to this person honestly. You have to, that respect means you have to pretend that you don't feel this way. So we get robbed of that, or we're afraid. We're afraid to communicate, and that just builds up the likelihood that we're going to have a reaction. And then healthy boundaries as well, being able to say no, being able to define the differences between our responsibilities and other people's responsibilities. That's a very helpful way of managing anger as well. Okay, so the quick test right now. Test is the wrong word. I don't want to trigger anyone. Quick survey. What do you believe about this? 107 of us in this webinar. True or false? No one can make you angry without your consent. No one can make you angry without your permission. Do you believe that is true? Okay, I have a true first out the gates. True, true, false. 3-1 at the moment. Okay, a lot of people are saying it is true. Okay. And some falses. And I would guess the people who are, should I say true and false, good answer. Yeah, we're getting some more falses now. I'm going to guess that's about 2/3 of you are saying it's true and about 1/3 saying it's false. I'm guessing that a lot of you who are saying it's false are probably, a lot of you think it's false or perhaps not commenting as well. We're getting more falses as we go. I think in a theoretical level, we can see this as true, but in our own lives, we often don't practice it. And this is where we give away the power for our anger. So when we blame other people for our anger, when we say, you made me angry, we shift the responsibility. We say that this isn't my feeling, actually, you're responsible for this feeling. You get to take ownership of it. And that robs me of the ability to take ownership for myself. So you might say, well, that's very well to say theoretically. What does that actually mean? If you think about one of the main triggers of anger being linked to self-worth, we can kind of change that sentence around to give it a different perspective. And we can say, well, maybe the actual sentence is saying no one can make me feel worthless without my consent. No one can make me feel bad about myself without my permission. And again, you might have a mixed response to that, true or false. And I see there's more answers coming through and more falses here. If you think about it, my assessment of what I'm worth is my assessment of what I'm worth. And that might be influenced by other people. In some ways, it probably should be influenced by feedback from the world, but only to an extent. At the end of the day, I get to decide my value. I get to decide my relationship with myself because I'm the expert on me. And if I'm giving that away, what I'm doing is I'm giving other people permission to make me feel a certain way about myself. And this is often the game that we play, the bargain we play, is we say to other people, we don't say this, but in some ways we kind of do. We say, okay, well, I'm depending on you to feel good about who I am. So I want your approval. I want your acceptance. I want your respect. And when I get those things, it proves that I'm enough. When I don't get those things from you, when I get disapproval or rejection, abandonment, disrespect, well, then the other side of that bargain is then I feel bad about myself. So if we're relying on people to really get us to feel a certain way about our value inherently and our adequacy, we're also giving them the same permission to make us feel intimate and complete. So I'm careful to say, obviously we live in a social world, and our interactions with people that matter to us do matter, and getting some feedback there is important. But at the end of the day, most of that assessment should come from ourselves about what we're worth. And if we can take that away and take that power back, what that means, people have a lot less power to make us angry. Someone might do something and we might feel a certain way about it. That's okay. But owning that responsibility is about changing that language and saying, actually, you can't make me angry without my permission. I'm feeling angry right now, and that's okay. I'm feeling this way. I'm not blaming you for it. And that allows us then to take responsibility for it. And we can never take responsibility for the way we deal with it unless we can never change, we can never regulate it in a helpful way unless we take responsibility for it. So we'll come back to that at the end. If you have any thoughts on that and you're sticking to both, and I haven't convinced you, let's talk about it in the Q&A. We'll definitely come back to it. And this works both ways. So if you are saying, well, I need to take responsibility for my anger, you're also saying to someone else, someone maybe important in your life, well, they also need to take responsibility for their anger. So you can't be responsible for another person's feelings. You can't be responsible for another person's behavior. We think about anger management generally as well. On that note, it's often about when we're presenting a lot of anger, what this is often doing is pointing to something in our life that's expressing something that's just not quite right, something that needs to be changed, perhaps. And that might be, again, it might be boundaries. It might be that I'm giving too much of myself away. It might be that I'm not really creating space in my life and my relationships for my needs. It might be that I'm constantly just pressing down my feelings, not really acknowledging the way that I feel. Either way, it's pointing to something in my life, my lifestyle, my relationships that's in need of address. Because often anger is just this property, this emergent property of the way that our lifestyle is at the time. And of course, there's a relationship between stress and anger. So if we are under more stress, we're much more likely to have a fair trigger. We're much more likely to have less patience, less tolerance for it. And this can then allow us also to be proactive about the way we manage our anger by knowing, okay, well, when I go through stressful situations, I probably need to find ways of maybe limiting my exposure to certain things, to certain people, because I know that I'm more at risk in that situation. Whatever it is, we get the opportunity to respond in a certain way. Okay. Yeah. Just seeing Yaku's comment here and its relevance. I'm just going to quickly say it out. If you give people the opportunity to make you angry, you're thinking that you are not worthy. So people there are there to manipulate you, friend or family, outsider. If you get angry, you give them the satisfaction of life that will feel good, while you as a person feel sad and angry. There's truth there. I think giving away our reaction for anger does give other people power. I don't think necessarily that people are, consciously trying to take that from us, but I think everyone is just trying to deal with their own situations in life, and sometimes it comes out in various ways. But yeah, ideally, we want to be able to go through life where we have some responsibility for the way that we feel. And the point is there, we can give ourselves permission to feel angry. We can say, actually, I am angry, and I'm completely justified in being angry. It's not only am I justified, I should be angry right now because this is a situation that warrants an angry response. I get to choose how to do that, and I might choose that internalizing is the way to deal with this right now. Not that they internalizing to it bad. I might choose right now, yes, I am angry. I give myself permission to feel angry. I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm not going to say anything, but I am angry and I'm acknowledging that. That's equally important. Okay, so you can go deeper with your anger. You can ask a series of questions, and see that says serious, series of why questions. I guess they're serious questions as well. But why am I getting angry? What's actually going on here? What's actually going on here in terms of my the underlying triggers? So something has happened and I'm angry. That's not the end of the conversation. It's the beginning of the conversation. Why am I angry? Someone, let's say, I heard that someone was speaking behind my back. They were saying things about me that weren't true to another person. Why am I angry? Well, I'm angry because I feel like people shouldn't do that. I feel like I trust this person. Why does that make me angry? Because now I feel like I can't trust them going forward. Or why does that make me angry? Because I feel sad and disappointed that relationships are. But you can also say, well, why does it make you angry? It makes me angry. Well, sorry, that's what relationships can be. Why does it make me angry? It makes me angry also because it makes me look bad. I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed by it. Why am I embarrassed? Well, I'm embarrassed because I care what this person thinks about me and I care about my reputation. And right now, with the stories that would be going out there. So as you go deeper, see, you can keep on going with that. Just for time's sake, I won't. As you go deeper, you can start to see actually there are deeper reasons. Once you start to speak to those and interrogate them and find out what the underlying beliefs are, you can then again, intervene at the level of the trigger. So before we go to that, just Amanda, yes, being frustrated, yeah, it's definitely a level of being angry. It's a kind of mild part of anger. There are a lot of good comments there. I'm going to try and come back to them as we go. So anger is often an expression of pain. This is quite a helpful way of thinking about anger. So you can think about anger in terms of linked to our self-worth and triggering feelings that we have about ourselves, limiting beliefs, self-defeating beliefs we have about ourselves. You can also think about anger as an expression of pain. Often that is an expression of the same pain, because if I feel terrible about myself. That's a very painful experience to inhibit. So it might be something that's happening in an instant. For example, I feel hurt that this person I trusted has betrayed my trust. I feel hurt that these people that I care about, that think about me in a certain way. That's painful. But often it's pain that is historic. So it's things that have happened to us before, situations that feel familiar, situations that kind of take us back to where we've been hurt before or bring up pain that we've felt before. If I have injured my hand, let's say I was playing squash and I fell and now my hand is injured and someone comes up and shakes my hand, that's going to hurt. It's not that they're actually shaking my hand that's causing the pain. It's the pain that I carry historically. And it's the same, emotionally. Something might have happened to me, and then someone, unbeknownst to them, walks upon that, triggers it, and then I have this painful response. And often we express pain as anger. That's historic pain there. Okay, and that's the importance, to get to Christopher's point, of healing from past anger or pain, is if we give ourselves the opportunity to heal from the wounds that we carry, to do the work on them, that often means there's less unresolved pain there that has all of this psychological energy that can come up at any time. Allowing ourselves to heal means we're probably going to have less of it being triggered. And if it is triggered, which is fine and understandable and normal, it might not have the same intensity as pain that we haven't had the opportunity to address, engage with the process to see the light of day. So healing is a really important way of healing as well. When we think about anger, it's there to get rid of the thing that is threatening us. That's the basis for it. So it wants to annihilate. That's often why we have such a strong response. It wants to just destroy the thing that's causing us to feel a certain way. Again, very often not possible, or practical, or appropriate, and very often legal to do that. But understanding that's why we often aggressive response to anger, is that it's coming from this impulse that we have to annihilate whatever's in front of us. That's really normal, but it doesn't mean we have to necessarily. That's why it's such a powerful feeling. And if you think about your anger on a slightly different note as a series of unfulfilled needs. So what are my needs right now that are unfulfilled in this moment? Well, it might be that I need to feel big. And right now I feel very small. The thing that happened made me feel very small. And now I'm using my anger as a way of making me feel powerful. It might be that I need to feel worthy. And what happened right now made me feel ready. And that's my need that I have. That again pointed back to me. It allowed me responsibility for it, allowed me then to feel less like I'm out of control in these experiences. Maybe I need to be heard, and I'm just feeling like I'm not heard. So understanding also where your anger is coming from in terms of the needs there. The point there, as well, generally with all of these points, is we have to deal with the enemy inside before we deal with the enemy outside. So we have to deal with the enemy inside before we deal with it. So you can think about negative thoughts that are causing anger. This is the process, as it's sometimes called, of throwing cognitive kindling on the emotional fire of anger. So cognitive kindling, that means the thoughts that we have are like kindling the little sticks that we throw on a fire that really make it raw. We can think certain things. We can have these thought patterns that just feed back into the anger. So we feel angry, and then I have all of these thoughts. Why did this person do this to me? How could they? Who do they think I am? And those thoughts then are feeding the anger, and it starts to become this fire. So we can identify these thoughts and intervene when we need. One of them is overgeneralizing, using things like always and never and everyone, and I'll never get the credit. For example, that overgeneralizing can be a way of really stoking our anger. Obsessing, so how things should be, having really rigid expectations of people. This is how you're meant to do it, and this is how you should treat someone, and this is how it should be. Life tends to not play that way, of course, and people aren't us. People come with their own expectations and their own norms. And if we go through life with those rigid expectations, often now our anger is triggered as well. We mind read all the time. We jump to conclusions. We assume, and we often assume the worst, right? This person talked behind my back because they think that I'm an idiot and think that I won't find out. I'll show them. As opposed to when they're talking behind my back because maybe they're feeling insecure and maybe that's how they bond with people. It's not right, but I can understand probably has less to do with me and more to do with them trying to be accepted in other places. So we collect straws, again, things to kind of build up the narrative that we have. We don't focus on this confirmation bias. We don't focus on things that disprove it. We focus on what proves the thing that we believe. So we can let these small irritations build up. You get home, and you've had a bad day, and then you start looking around. It's wrong. The house is dirty, and this must be done. And this collects and builds. It just gets this narrative, and it starts getting its own momentum, building the anger, until eventually all comes out. And then blaming again. Putting the responsibility for our feelings, putting the responsibility for choices that we've made on other people is also one way of Sturdee. Yeah, so that's quite explanatory. That one. See, there are a lot of really good questions and comments coming through. I'm not, just because there's so many of them, I'm not addressing all of them, unfortunately. But let's flag some of them, and we'll come back to them. I'm going to leave some time for some. So other tips, and again, this is about now looking more at the intervening at the part of the level of the choice. So again, you can imagine the situation that happens, the trigger that you have, the emotion you feel, the choice that you make, and then the behavior that you do. This is now just about a choice, right? So it's about setting up your life in such a way that you're less likely to experience the outburst, but also saying, okay, well, if I've done the deeper work and gone deeper and understood where my anxiety, understood some of my triggers, and understood some of my pain, and dealt with myself a bit, and having more categories in relation to myself, what can I do as well when I get angry? How can I find ways of responding? Because often the choices that we have, again, they feed back and they make us more angry. If I choose not to shout, I'm more likely to start calming down. If I start shouting, what that actually does is it makes me angry. The process of shouting is something that feeds back and actually makes us more angry. It's a feedback loop. Okay. So timing is important. If you and your partner are fighting at the same time, maybe it's just for night, maybe it's when you're feeling tired or distracted. Think about other times of dealing with these things and be proactive about that and know that about yourself. Sometimes we have to avoid things. Avoidance gets a bad rap as one. That's often if we do it too much. But there are times where avoidance is actually helpful. That we don't have to fight every fight. We don't have to die on every hill. Part of knowing when to just walk away from something or when to not go out looking for something is a way of managing our anger in a helpful way. And we can't do that all the time. It's not to say that we need to always be avoiding. But there is a time where we can just say, this is not something that is actually going to be good for me. I don't think I can change it. Therefore, I'm not going to go out looking for it. And find alternatives. So be creative with what we do. We find that, the route home that you're taking every day is causing you to be really angry. Take another route, even if it takes longer. You feel that a certain person keeps letting you down, maybe stop asking them for things. Avoid that aspect of that relationship. Change your expectations. You have control over that. And it is possible to check in with yourself as well. So what that means is when you start getting upset about something, you can take a moment, just take that pause. And what the pause does is it allows your rational part of the brain to get engaged again. Because if you're angry, it's emotional, it's a reaction. It's okay, it's normal to feel angry, but if we're just acting purely on the emotion, what that means is we're not allowing ourselves the opportunity to think logically and to put in the healthy filters that can be there. Questions such as, how important is this really? It feels like the most important. It feels like it's just completely absorbing me right now because I'm angry. How am I going to feel about it in an hour? How am I going to feel about it in a day? How am I going to feel about it in a month, a year? Getting some perspective. That's a very intellectual process. You're thinking about it right there. You're filtering this really powerful feeling of anger with this and it's allowing you to think rationally about it. Is this worth getting angry about? Sometimes you're going to say, yes, it is. This is a big thing. It is worth getting angry about, and I'm going to choose what I do with that. I'm going to choose how I get angry about it. But often the answer is probably going to be no, it's not. This is just, maybe this is my pride being hurt right now. The fact that it seemed like my girlfriend ignored me then, when I said something. Maybe I felt pretty embarrassed. Maybe that's what it is. I don't have to necessarily now throw my toys out the cot to feel like I'm being seen. Maybe this is not worth it. Will this ruin the rest of my day? It might, yes. And this is again why we avoid anger. It often doesn't feel very good. It doesn't feel very good in the moment because it's quite overwhelming, and it often doesn't feel good afterwards. We have that adrenaline come down, and then the regret. So it has the potential to ruin our days. Is this worth it right now? And again, sometimes the answer to that is yes. I just want to stress this. It's not about saying you can never be angry, but there are occasions where we have to say, I'm dying on this hill. And then is my response appropriate? Often, and this is the key to really healthy anger management, is we kind of don't have to be perfect with it, but we can feel that, okay, the way I'm responding is kind of proportionate to the situation. As opposed to just having these really just reactions. Something small happens and explode, a volcanic explosion. Is my response appropriate? Does this feel kind of what would be appropriate in this situation? And then also, is there anything I can do about it? Sometimes the answer to that in a humbling way is there's actually not. I'm not going to teach this taxi driver how to stay in his lane. You really think that me hooting at him is now going to make him stop? There's nothing I can do about that. Maybe this isn't my fight to fight. Maybe this person that keeps on disappointing me, maybe that's just who they are. Maybe I can't change. And maybe, I can acknowledge some disappointment, frustration myself, but I don't necessarily have to wage a hearts and minds campaign on it. And is it worth my time? This is an act of self-care as well. Okay, well, I'm going to invest certain aspects of myself, my emotional energy, my time that I could be spending in other areas. Is this worth it, or are there calendar ways I could act? So these are just types of questions you can ask yourself to engage that the prefrontal cortex, part of our brain where it's less emotional, more cognitive. And you can go too far with this. Again, it's about balance. This is what we spoke about with EQ, emotional intelligence. It's about finding a balance between emotions and acknowledging them, creating space for them, and then bringing in the analytical parts and logical parts of our brain. If we're just using the logical parts of our brain and we're just intellectualizing, then those feelings are still there, and then we're kind of using the intellectual side as a way of locking them down and keeping them captive, and then that becomes dangerous in its own right. So it's about balance, and that takes practice. So you should consider professional help. Firstly, if you feel that it would be helpful, but these are kind of few basic warning signs, but a few things you can look out for, a few markers. So if you feel constantly frustrated and angry, it doesn't matter what you're trying, you're not getting anywhere. And this, that's an obvious point, but sometimes we haven't actually tried managing our anger. It's something I sometimes ask people, and it's, I don't want to respond in this way. And I say, well, have you tried not responding in this way? And sometimes the answer is yes. If there's something going on, tried that, but there's something stopping it, it's not possible. But if the answer is no, I haven't actually tried, well, go try it first. Try responding to your anger in a certain way. If you can't, well, then you probably need some assistance. And that also is quite normal. If your temper is causing problems in your life, you're paying a price for it, work, relationships, etc. If you're avoiding new events and people because you feel like your anger is going to become a problem, maybe if you got in trouble with law or there's ever been any physical violence, these are kind of red flags. So you probably need someone to help you with this. To deal with it. And anger management is one of the success stories of psychology generally, is that they respond really well to therapy and counseling. So these are normal challenges. Yeah. So ego, I just saw a question. The ego is related to anger. It's related to anger in the same way that self-esteem is often pride, and often behind that pride is a very fragile view of ourselves, and so our anger is a way of protecting us. It's an ego defense, where it makes us feel big when we feel small. So that's that. There's a lot of questions there, so I'm going to see what's coming up and try to answer a few of the ones that have been. I left a little bit more time today just because I saw them all coming up. So thank you for your attendance. Thank you for the questions. Let's get into it. Why do I feel pain? Who is responsible for it? Is it necessary? How do I deal with it? Must I see someone can deal with my own? So this is big questions, lots of questions there. Firstly, pain is normal. Going through life is painful because life is difficult, and tragedy and difficulty and adversity is all part of the deal, disappointment. So feeling those feelings is a normal part of being human. If you feel that you lack the skills to deal with those feelings and regulate them, then yeah, seeing someone is a helpful way of doing it, of dealing with it. But you might find that, just by spending time with them and acknowledging those feelings and doing whatever it is, journaling, speaking to people generally, that's one way of dealing with it as well. So anger can lead to drugs and alcohol, Nicotine. Indeed, it can. We often self-medicate, but often what happens is because we're under the use of drugs or under the influence of drugs and alcohol, our inhibitions are more restrained, which means people tend to be more likely to act out in impulsive and spontaneous ways, and that fuels the anger more often than not. Questions, what do I do when I wake up feeling sad and want to cry out loud? Understand where that sadness is coming from would be helpful to do some work on that, but also maybe just cry out loud, maybe create spaces for life where you can cry out loud. Maybe that's okay too. Again, these are deep questions with lots to say on them. If you feel these things are too much, it's always worth speaking to someone. Just going back to some of the questions we had here. So mainly asking, does the same work with happiness? That's about, giving permission to people to make us feel happy. Happiness is a complicated thing. Ultimately, happiness is just a feeling. So yeah, we'll feel happy sometimes, we'll feel unhappy, and other times it's appropriate to feel unhappy. It's appropriate to feel that feeling of happiness in our past. But I think, happy with ourselves and worthy, I think those are things we have control over, more control than we often acknowledge. We often give so much of that control to other people, and that does undermine our happiness. Yeah, Tamaine, great question about forgiveness. That's something I didn't touch on, but the inability to forgive is one way of making sure that we will continue to be angry. And anger is a normal, healthy human emotion. Resentment is not. It's normal, but it's not healthy. If we are resentful and we're holding on to that resentment, what that does, it greatly increases the likelihood that we're going to have a very low tolerance for anything else in our life, that we're going to be angry a lot of the time. So forgiveness is one of the best ways of dealing with the historic pain that we have. And it's an easy thing to say, to just say, we need to forgive. You could spend a full session, you could spend years in counseling working through that, because these are big, big challenges. Forgiveness can be some of the hardest choices that we make, but often they're the most liberating as well. And when you forgive, you don't have to say everything's okay. You don't have to say it's right, that it was okay, but rather that you don't need to carry it anymore. That the burden that you are carrying, the hurt, has become too much, and you have to be ready. It's nothing you can rush into. And sometimes, again, it's a really long time, but it's very much linked to anger, and it's linked to the pain we feel, and it's linked to how we get triggered by other people. So I know, there's kind of questions. I know, Jim, you're asking, is it the right thing to do? I definitely can't say what the right thing to do or not is. Every situation, because in some situations it would be the right thing to do, to express your views in the situation, even if it compromises the feeling of other people around you. And that doesn't necessarily make you insensitive. Of course not. But at the same time, the right thing in other situations might be to not express your views in the situation. You have to be able to trust yourself to make that choice, right? But certainly, the inability to express your views in situations just because you're worried about how other people would feel would really handicap you in life. That would make you unable to communicate how you feel. And just because someone feels a certain way doesn't mean you're actually hurting. They're responsible for their feelings. You can be kind and compassionate and sensitive about the way you choose to speak your truth. Inability to express your truth eventually means it's all going to come out in ways that are going to end up doing you anyway. Look like you're a bad person. it's actually kinder to find healthy, kind, compassionate ways of being honest than lying to people around us about how we really feel, because that's the recipe for. Just going through a few more of these questions. I know I'm not going to get to all of them. I'm just trying to get the ones that are coming up more than once. Yeah, I mean, if you're still fighting issues on historical pains, it's not easy to move away. That just means that you're a human being. Again, that's really normal. We all find that really hard. Yes, professional help can be a really helpful way of dealing with it. There are many ways of dealing with it. Professional help can be one way of doing it. So yes, I definitely would encourage that. Brandon's question in the Q&A: how and why does sadness relate so strongly to anger? I'm not entirely sure, but Brandon, if you could say a bit more on that just before we run out of time. What do you mean by sadness relating so strongly to anger? I'm not entirely with you on that. If you could expand, I'd love to speak on that. So not respecting someone doesn't necessarily mean the same as anger. When we let go of our anger, which is to say we find acceptance with something that's happened, or we get to the point where we can forgive someone, we're not for a moment saying anything else than I'm letting go of that anger. We get to choose how we think about that situation still. We get to choose what we do with that. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. Forgiveness is not wiping the slate clean. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is just forgiveness. It's just letting go of the anger. It's just saying I don't need the anger anymore. We get to choose what to do with it afterwards. If you're provoked, if you're in a situation where you're constantly provoked, I mean, I would say that there's always a bit of a challenge with the word provoked, because it kind of signals some type of intention there. And I'm not saying that people never intend to trigger our anger. A lot of the time, they are unknowingly doing it. Their choice or their intention is not necessarily to make us angry, but it might be to fulfill some of their needs. It might be wrong that they're doing it, but it's often much more focused on their needs than it is focused on actually have to get us in the way. But yeah, that's a challenge. If you're in an environment where people have a certain way that's leading to you feeling angry, it is a challenge. And there's no answer I can give there that would explain it without me knowing all the details. But yeah, you have to take that seriously. You can use it as an opportunity to get better at managing your anger and regulating your feelings. Use it as an opportunity to say what needs to change here, what is within my control to change. How would I like to be responding here? Is it an ideal way of being my best version of myself in this environment, or perhaps do I need to think about maybe leaving this environment? To me, yeah, letting go of anger while implementing our boundaries. I mean, you kind of answered it in the question. How do we let go of anger while implementing boundaries? Well, we implement our boundaries whilst we're letting go of our anger. It's really that's what it is. We keep our boundaries. Knowing the difference is so important. Saying, I'm going to continue to keep my boundaries here. We don't need anger for boundaries. We often think that we do. We think that by letting go of my anger, then my boundaries are going to all come crashing down. And that's because anger is a good way of enforcing boundaries. But self-respect is also a good way of enforcing boundaries. Having responsibilities to ourselves is also a good way of enforcing boundaries. Okay, last question. There's so many, and I'm sorry I'm not going to get to them all, but I see we're almost at time. So let me answer one, maybe two more. How can you help someone who has anger issues because they lost their parents at a very tender age? Well, you can only do so much. Ultimately, they need to go on that healing process. Firstly, it's very normal that they're feeling that way. Again, anger is often an expression of that type of pain. You have to encourage them to do the work, to get help, to see people that they need to see in order to get that healing process going. That's where the support lies. Encourage them to do the work that they have to do. You can't do it for them. Yeah. Good. I think let us leave it there. Thank you very much for your participation. Fascinating questions. I hope that there was something. Yeah, anger is, as people questions, there's so relevant to our lives, relationship challenges that we have. Oh, sorry, I forgot Brandon's question. We're going to expand on that. Let me quickly get that. Sometimes when sadness becomes a bit overwhelming, it makes you angry. Yeah, so yeah, I think so. I think anger is often a response to certain fragilities that we might feel, and sadness might be one of it. I think, as always, just going back and asking yourself those why, getting to the root of it, where's the sadness coming from? They definitely can be related, Brandon. Yeah, I think that's true. We often learn ways of dealing with discomfort, and sometimes anger is a learned response. Yeah, apologies for letting you there. So yeah, I think it's a really relevant topic, as you can see by all the questions. So I hope that this is something that you guys can use as a foundation for continuing to work on this, and to continuing to find ways of being present with your anger in a way that's helpful and honest, but also not going to cause you unnecessary unhappiness, and you're not going to pay necessary exorbitant prices for. So thank you very much to everybody. Thank you for joining us. And we will see you at the end of the month with the next session. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good day.